When I was growing up, my grandmother would tell me hundreds of fairy tales about King Arthur when he was a knight. She would craft these amazing tales about the adventures where he roamed the land, helping people and slaying every monster that dared cross his path. Then, when I was around 4 or 5, I started reading comics, and I mean that in the loosest sense of the word because I couldn't read. I just liked the pictures. But when I learned how to read, I fell in love with comics too because they were a lot like those fairy tales that my grandmother used to tell me. Then I realized they were almost exactly the same. Most fairy tales, especially the ones about knights, exist in worlds of chivalric romance, worlds that mix folklore and legends with elements of romanticism. These stories always feature a morally righteous hero who goes on a mythic quest to defeat some great evil, then ends by teaching the audience a lesson or two about how to be a good person. Knights have always been the go-to for these types of stories, so when they fell out of vogue, people started looking at superheroes to fill the same niche. Superman is probably the best example of this. Just replace the shining armor with red and blue spandex. Pretty much every Fleischer Superman cartoon ended with the Man of Steel imparting some moral lesson to the viewer, then saying how it's all part of truth, justice, and the American way. But some superheroes have taken the traditional fairy tale and twisted it to become corrupted into a dark facsimile of itself. Recently, I rewatched a little gem of a movie that a lot of people don't know about called Batman Gotham Knight. The reason that nobody really knows about it is because it came out a measly 4 days before Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. But Gotham Knight was supposed to be a companion piece to Nolan's movies, bridging the gap of time between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And it's such a great piece of Batman fiction. It's an anthology film featuring 6 animated shorts created by 4 different animation studios and 6 directors. It's got one of my favorite on-screen depictions of both Batman and Gotham. But just like how Nolan's Batman was a darker and grittier take on the Batman mythology, Gotham Knight is a dark, modern take on the classic knight's fairy tale. Tell me if this sounds familiar. A heroic armored knight descends into a dark dungeon to defeat the evil wizard who has taken somebody hostage. While it may sound like something out of a Dungeons & Dragons session or a Knight's Tale, that's actually how the third segment of Batman Gotham Knight begins. And on the surface, Batman has a lot of similarities to the fairy tale knights you might know. But once you start to dive deeper into the character, you start to notice how Batman is kind of the antithesis to the knight in shining armor. His armor and crusade against crime immediately draw the comparison to the White Knight, but unlike the knights of old, he doesn't ride a white horse and roam the kingdom looking to root out evil. Instead, Batman lurks in the shadows of Gotham and brutally defeats every person who would dare commit a crime in his city. The chivalric code is synonymous with knights in the same way that not killing is synonymous to Batman, but while knights adhere to their code out of a sense of moral responsibility, Batman adheres to his code because he knows that if he crosses the line and kills someone, he will never be able to come back from that and become as bad as the criminals that he fights every night.
What? What, your moral code just won't allow for that? It's too hard to cross that line?
No! God almighty, no! It'd be too damned easy. All I've ever wanted to do is kill him. A day doesn't go by when I don't think about subjecting him to every horrendous torture he's dealt out to others, and then end him.
Aw, so you do think about me.
But if I do that, if I allow myself to go down into that place, I'll never come back.
Fairy tales often center around the violence that knights put onto villains, but it never emphasizes that violence or focuses on it. Meanwhile, Batman was born from that violence, and his stories always emphasize it. Just like King Arthur, Batman is the chosen one, but he wasn't chosen by fate. He was chosen by 2 silver bullets in an alley that set him down the path to becoming the Dark Knight. His entire existence is centered around the pain he feels at all times. While he's widely known as a superhero without any superpowers, he actually has one very special power that's also external: being able to work through his pain. The entirety of the 5th segment is devoted to how he learned how to deal with everything that the world throws at him. Throughout the whole movie, he's shot, bitten, kicked, punched, and stabbed, but he just keeps going forward to achieve his goals. In any other narrative, Batman would be the bad guy opposed to the White Knight, but because this is a twisted fairy tale, Batman is actually the good guy here. He's both a true knight while also being the complete opposite of that ideal. In Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and pretty much every fairy tale Disney movie, the kingdom is idyllic, covered in green, and everybody is happy for the most part. It borders on the medieval utopia. Yeah, there's some bad people doing some bad things, but they're never a fixture of that world. Once Cinderella puts on her glass slipper and Sleeping Beauty is woken up from her eternal slumber, evil is banished from the land until their direct-to-DVD sequels, but those also follow the same format. It's clear evil is momentary in fairy tale worlds, which is why you can get the storybook ending where everybody lives happily ever after. But much like how Batman's dark fairy tale has a dark knight, it also has a dark kingdom.
Hey, Bat, when you flying? What the city look like from up on high?
It looks dirty.
Batman Professor Will Brooker once said, "The defining trait of Gotham City is that there must always be crime." Evil is not momentary in Gotham. Gotham is evil. Inspired by Burton and Schumacher's versions of Gotham, the animation studios did an amazing job making sure that the city felt like a world of gothic horror. It's dark and dystopic, outright antagonistic towards its citizens. Buildings, cathedrals, and ornate statues are aggressively stacked on top of each other, making the scenes that are supposed to give us a wide open view of the city feel claustrophobic. The dense mix of architectural styles give it a dreamlike feeling, as if the city exists outside of any specific period in time. Gargoyles are perched on every roof corner, as if they're about to pounce on the people walking below. Shadows are omnipresent throughout the whole city, showing how darkness has taken over the kingdom that they live in. While you would think that the scenes of evil taking place in the darkness would be contrasted by scenes of good taking place in the light, the daylight scenes only serve to reveal the mountain of grime that covers the city. In daylight, the first villain holds up people on top of a building, then flies through the city and kidnaps a woman. In another sequence, a businessman gloats about how he had a civil rights leader killed so that he could build a golf park in an impoverished area of the city. And the final scene that takes place in the light has a man hiring Deadshot to kill Batman. Gotham isn't and never will be the idyllic kingdom from something like The Sword in the Stone. Gotham is a kingdom so corrupted by evil that it has corrupted everything and everyone that lives inside of its perimeter. Gotham is a city gone mad.
I gotta tell you, partner, this place gives me the creeps. The whole island abandoned to madness.
This whole city's abandoned to madness.
When Ramirez and Allen are delivering the villain from the first segment to Arkham, we get the scene that cuts between the cops, the villain, and the inmates, and it perfectly shows how much of a corrupting influence Gotham is on its people. Ramirez and Allen are part of the few still actively fighting against the insanity of the city, but they're ever so slowly being corrupted themselves. The villain has halfway fallen into that corruption, and before long he will become as insane as the inmates who have been twisted to look and feel inhuman. Then they reach the doctors, and you see how far the corruption reaches. The doctors, who are supposed to be the people who help everyone they can, have the same deranged grins of the inmates. There is no help to be done here, only corruption. Even the building itself has been corrupted into an M.C. Escher painting brought to life. But nowhere is the corruption that the madness has wrought more prevalent than when you look at the villains of the movie. When you think of the classic fairy tale villain, who do you think of? Is it the evil wizard with crazy magic powers, or maybe the dragon who breathes fire? Both of those villains appear in Gotham Knight, but just like the inmates and doctors, they've been twisted by the darkness of Gotham and become something else, something darker. The dragon in his lair has become Killer Croc in the sewers of Gotham, surrounded by the rotting bodies of the city's dead. He even breathes fire when Batman explodes a grenade in his mouth. The evil wizard and his army of minions have been replaced by Scarecrow and his underground death cult. Instead of using magic, though, he uses his fear toxin to battle the night. Then the last villain of the movie arrives. The Black Knight is a pretty famous stock character in fairy tales, usually being the physical equal but moral opposite to the hero, standing for everything that the hero doesn't. Deadshot is exactly that. Just like Batman, he's a regular human in a mask with a special ability, but instead of using it for good, he uses it to fuel his greedy and evil motivations. Of course, by the end of the movie, all of the villains get defeated by the Good Knight because of his superior abilities and better morals, just like always. But this is a dark fairy tale, so even the good knight is a dark knight except for the evil bits. Black knights usually hid their identity from the public so they could move unimpeded by the king. They usually love the heat of battle, reveling in the bloodshed, but because they're still a knight, they hold to their own moral code, and that all fits Batman to a T. When you first see Batman in this movie, he's not the Batman you'd expect to see. At the start of the first segment, 4 kids meet at their local abandoned warehouse turned skate park, where 3 of them narrate their encounters with Batman before they arrive. The first kid talks about a Batman with glowing red eyes who moves and fights like a shadow. The second is a half-bat, half-man creature who tears through the skies of Gotham like a bat out of hell. And the third is a super fighting robot with a laser arm who can leap tall buildings in a single bound. None of the kids can agree on who or what Batman actually is, but they all say that their version is the correct one. And in a weird way, this is the most fairy tale aspect of the entire movie. Here's a quick history lesson. While the stories of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table are ubiquitous throughout the world, no one can really agree on who they were or even if they were real. So their stories have changed a lot over the years. Sometimes King Arthur's a righteous knight, which is the form that most people are familiar with, and sometimes he's a blonde anime waifu made to serve teenagers in a Japanese battle royale. Batman stories have shifted as much over the years. Sometimes he's happy Batman, sometimes he's serious Batman, and sometimes campy Batman. Both characters have been presented in a ridiculous number of ways over the years, but the key details around them always stay the same. Arthur is always a knight who can pull the sword from the stone and eventually becomes king of Britain. Batman's parents were always murdered, he always dresses up as a bat, and he always protects Gotham. Their appearances might change, but I 100% assure you that those traits will always be there for the characters. But unlike the King Arthur stories, there is a real person behind the legend. When the 4th kid has his encounter with Batman, he sees him for who he really is. He's just a normal man under the cowl. He's not a monster or a robot, just a man, bruised and battered from his continued battle with the villain over the day. He's not an invulnerable creature of the night, he just pretends to be one. Batman envelops himself in the legend around him because he knows that's the only way he can defeat the villains that he faces every night, a lot of which are legends themselves. But not the fairy tale legend that King Arthur fought. Instead, they're urban legends of the modern age. An alligator in the sewers, a scarecrow come to life, and a deranged assassin lurking the shadows. Batman became his own urban legend so that he could be on an even playing field with the corrupted villains of Gotham. But there is no storybook ending to Batman's dark fairy tale. The last scene of the movie is Batman getting patched up from his battle with Deadshot, only to look out the window and see the bat signal calling him. This isn't a Disney fairy tale where everyone got to live happily ever after. Batman will forever be locked in a tense fight between good and evil, a battle that will forever be passed on in hushed whispers among scared criminals. The urban legend of the Dark Knight of Gotham. Hey, thank you for watching my vid. If you liked it, leave a like, tell your friends, and make them watch it too. Have a wonderful day. I love you.